Welcome to SB&M is Here, the State Bar of New Mexico's official podcast. In this series, we'll discuss topics such as professional development, tools of the legal trade, and mental and professional well-being. Connecting the legal community across New Mexico, SB&M is here. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SB&M is Here. This is Morgan Pettit, Member Services Manager and Podcast Producer for the State Bar of New Mexico. I again want to say a big thank you to Sydney Hill at Second Judicial. In the very first episode of this 2021 season, I put out the call to the judiciary to reach out to me if they were interested in getting on the airwaves, and this call also still applies. Feel free to reach out at any time. Sydney jumped at the chance and made this episode and its companion episode happen. So Sydney, if you're listening, thank you again for everything. I also want to say one more big thank you to John Zalman of the NMCDLA. He was instrumental in getting these episodes produced, and I really could not be more thankful for his partnership and getting everybody on board together. So John, thank you. And a final big thank you to all the judges who participated, all four of the new criminal court judges. I know your time is precious professionally and personally. And so I'm very thankful that you were able to hop on and share your thoughts and a little bit about yourself with the State Bar membership. Now on to the content. This episode is one of two that is sort of like a meet and greet for our new Second Judicial Criminal Court judges that were sworn in early 2021. Roberta Yurcic of Roberta Yurcic Legal Services was gracious enough to interview Judge Wernersbach and Judge Montano. So I'll hand it over to her and enjoy.
Okay, thank you, Morgan, for that introduction. My name is Roberta Yurcic, and this is a podcast where we get to know Judge Wernersbach and Judge Montano, who are both recently appointed judges at the Second Judicial District Court. So let's get into it. The first question I have for both judges is how would you describe your judicial philosophy? And I'd first like to ask Judge Wernersbach.
That's an interesting question. I don't know that I would say I'm subscribed to one particular judicial philosophy, and I feel like that question comes up more on like appellate level judges, sort of how they view this like bigger, like sort of policy arguments. Here in the trial court, I feel like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like a case by case basis, right? Like some cases really need a broader view at like a holistic approach to what is going to rehabilitate this person, or in some cases require a better approach at what's going to protect our community more, and that's more an issue. And so I feel like it really is kind of a case by case basis for me, what I'm sort of referring on, in my own brain of where the case needs to go or what's important in that particular case. But I don't know, what would you say, Judge Montano?
I think I have less of a philosophy, but more of principles that I try and address each case with in each hearing. And the first thing is we all, and I think Judge Wernersbach would say this, is we want to get it right, whatever the decision is, whether we're making a suppression issue, if there's a motion before us, if it's a pretrial detention, or if it's a sentencing. And the way I feel that I can best do that is I need to be listening carefully. I need to be prepared. If the parties have, filed something, I want to be ready to address whatever they've filed in motions. And, at the end of the day, when your goal is to get it right, you want to make sure you're serving with compassion, because ultimately we need to uphold the law and the Constitution while protecting the public. And I think that's something I know Judge Wernersbach would agree with, that we all are trying to make sure that we're getting these decisions right.
Much better answer. Yes, exactly. I do agree.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you both for those responses. That kind of leads nicely into the next question, which is, again, starting with Judge Wernersbach, what is your overall approach to cases?
I mean, I think like Judge Montano said, I think being very prepared. I'm trying to be very prepared for each case, even if it's just a plea, you know, and we're in this pod system right now. So it's a little tricky because we're hearing a bunch of other judges' cases. And so you get cases, you know, for the first time ever that's at a plea. And so there's not a lot of familiarity with the defendant or the facts at that point, but trying at least to have a good overview of what's happened, what they've been through so far, what the allegations were in the first place. And so I think, yes, much like Judge Montano said, just being prepared and then listening, because sometimes, you know, you approach or come to a case already thinking a certain way, and then the attorneys might say something in the hearing that changes you entirely or introduces you to a new element of the case you hadn't considered. And so I think trying to be prepared, but then also having an open mind and listening at each setting to what's coming up is how I'm approaching the cases right now.
I agree. The pod system is something that Judge Wernersbach and Judge Fox and Judge Baca and Miller, we all came into this midstream in the pandemic. And in coming midstream, every hearing just about that is before us is midstream. You know, we're hearing cases that another colleague heard, you know, weeks ago or at the last setting, and it's not necessarily the assigned judge. There are days where we're taking pleas to cases that aren't our case, and the sentencing gets put off weeks down the road. So in preparation for my week next week, I'm looking at sentencings that I have, and you know, it could be that Judge Wernersbach was the one who heard the plea. So I need to go and refamiliarize myself maybe with what happened at previous settings, and needing to be prepared is something that is just what has to happen with this pod system. We're all having to rely on other judges. Our decisions that we're making, we need to be making clear our reasoning on the record, because in a lot of these instances, they're not even our cases. So we're all having to kind of go at this together and, you know, serve each other and hope to be getting the right decisions.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you both for those responses. So I guess just getting to know you both just on a more personal level, my next question is, what has been the greatest accomplishment in your legal career and in your personal life? And this time I'll start with you, Judge Montano.
Well, I guess in my personal life, prior to this job, I was a DA. I've worked in college athletics. I worked at both the University of New Mexico's athletic department and the University of Michigan's department. But in being an attorney or working in college athletics, at the end of the day, I'm a family man. And I always, you know, my greatest accomplishment is my family. So I have a wife that I've been married to for going on 11 years now, and we have two beautiful daughters. So I think being close with them and spending time with them is, you know, the greatest accomplishment in my personal life, I'd say. In my professional life, I would say it's working in this community for the last 10 years as a prosecutor and now as a judge. I think serving this community, it's where I grew up. I grew up on the west side of town. I went to law school here. Just being a member of this legal community, and more specifically this legal criminal community for this period of time, I think is my greatest accomplishment. And it's led me to this position that I'm in now, that I'm so happy to be serving the community in this form right now. So I would say that those are my two greatest accomplishments.
And I don't mean to copy, but basically the same answer. I mean, I too, you know, I practiced law, gosh, I'd have to do quick math, 16 years or so before, you know, I took this position on. I've had several, you know, case wins or steps up in my career that I feel proud of, but certainly my family is my pride and joy. My 5-year-old daughter is about to be 6, keeps me very busy and makes me very happy to be involved with her and to be in a position where I can have time to be involved with her and still, you know, be of service to this community. Like Judge Montano said, it's, you know, I think my greatest accomplishment is probably this appointment in this legal career. But it is an honor because I have practiced here for so long. I feel like I know so many of the people, and I really do care about what's happening around us. I live here. My kid goes to school down here. You know, like I care about what's happening in this community, and I really am honored and also really happy to be in this role where I can help contribute to that in a bigger way. So same answers. Judge Montano stole mine. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say the same thing. So I think I might be celebrating my 12th wedding anniversary this year, but I was like, yeah, 11, 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, 2 daughters.
Yeah, I'm hoping my wife doesn't listen to this because I think it's actually going on 12 years here in a couple of weeks. So I don't think she'll be tuning in, but hopefully this doesn't get back to her.
Yeah, time in 2020 was just weird. So I think she'll forgive you for that because
Let's hope.
Okay. All right. So one of the changes that came as a result of the pandemic was the pod system, and this is a system that the court is using to address cases and to hear cases for people who are in custody. Would one or both of you explain what the pod system is and how it works?
Sure. So when the pandemic happened and the court had to respond to the need to minimize the workforce, to prevent having to transport defendants into the courthouse and really just trying to minimize exposures, the court went to what's called the pod system. And the way judges are hearing cases is based on a rotation that we all take part of. And what we do is we hear the individualized pods at the jail each day. If I'm in a particular pod, say F pod, I hear all cases that are going to happen in F pod for that day. So I could be hearing Judge Wernersbach's case, I could be hearing Judge Fox's case or Judge Bach and Miller's case. So we're having to pull together to hear these cases. Part of the reason we've had to do that is to minimize court staff in the building. So instead of having all 11 criminal judges on the bench on a given day, we'll only have maybe 5 or 6, so we can allow for court monitors, to court clerks and court staff as a whole to minimize their exposures and allowing them to telework on those days that they're not needed in the courthouse. So that's how we've had to adapt during the pandemic by doing what's called the pod system.
And I guess just to further kind of clarify on that, so the judge is assigned to a particular pod for a particular week, and then but I guess my impression was that that the pod is a pod within a jail, and so any defendant who has a case that week will be heard with the judge assigned to their pod. Is that
right? Yeah, I think you stated that correctly. So the different pods that are at the jail, if an individual has court on a given day, whoever the judge assigned to that pod for the given day will hear the case. It's not necessarily going to be heard by the judge assigned to the case.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification. All right, next question. Do you believe that voluntary, professional, and community service is a necessary commitment for persons holding public office? And again, I would like to start with Judge Montano on this question.
Yeah, I think community service is very important. As elected and appointed officials, we need to be involved in the community. We need to know the community, and community service is a way of doing that. I grew up here in town, like I said. I went to St. Pius 10th High School, and one of the things we used to have to do each year was a community service project. And I was always involved in sports, and that was always something that I was drawn to. So for me, it's always been, helping in coaching, refereeing youth sports. Now that I have two daughters, that's, hopefully with the pandemic ending and some of youth sports coming back online again, there's going to be more opportunities for a lot of people to be engaging in those types of activities. And really for me, being able to reach out and deal with the community at the youngest of ages is always been something that has been important to me and something that I value.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, as Judge Montano said, I think as elected officials, to give back in that way, or just be involved more in that way is really important, so that people know who you are, and it's more of a interactive experience, especially as a judge, which can be kind of isolating, or you're kind of removed from the community a little bit. So it's nice to kind of be in the community. I spent most of my legal career helping to serve underserved communities, so I saw that as community service for a long time. But I also, that's always been sort of my passion, is kind of, vulnerable populations like that. So I've worked with aid services, or volunteered at Healthcare for the Homeless a couple of times and stuff like that. And I just feel like trying to help our underserved populations is really important, especially in downtown Albuquerque. So hopefully once the pandemic lifts, I think traditional community service, or even being at community meetings and such, has been suspended for a while, but hopefully that will start picking up again once these COVID restrictions lift, and we can get back out there again and meet the people that we're serving a little bit more.
Right. I do think that that's an important point that you hit on, is that, the pandemic has really just shaped the way that, or changed the way that the court system interacts with the public. And it's in some ways created, in my opinion, some barriers, but I guess then, and Judge Wernersbach, you kind of touched on this already, but what types of community service or what types of community involvement have you been involved in the past, or even presently?
Well, not so much presently, I have to say. Much of that shut down in the last year, and then taking on this new schedule a little bit has thrown some of my other things for a loop as I get used to the bigger caseloads and stuff. But I was on the board of New Mexico Aid Services for a while. That to me is just important, which is interesting given this pandemic. It has reminded me of some of that back in the past, of isolation and stigma and miscommunications between different communities. And so that is an important community to me to help provide service. And really just homeless, I try to do a lot of pro bono work for, a whole variety of people. Nurses at my mom's, assisted living facility, I've tried to do pro bono stuff for, just kind of random actions like that. I'm not currently on a board or anything like that, but I just try to help where I see fit, where I can, essentially. And so that's been most of my, quote unquote community service in the last couple of years, I would say, more than anything else.
Great. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for doing all of that. I know that was. And what about you, Judge Montano? I know you had kind of mentioned about your involvement in youth sports, doing refereeing or coaching. What types of community service are you currently involved in, or have you been involved with in the past?
Yeah, in the past, one of my former basketball coaches in my youth, his name's P.D. Gibson. He was a former Lobo. For many years, he taught at La Mesa Elementary School, and he's well past retirement age. I won't say how old he is, but for anyone listening to this podcast, they'll know how old P.D. Gibson is, and he's now at Alamosa. So for years, I'd always go and referee for some of his teams and help coach. My wife and I actually as well were involved in a lot of, or not a lot, but some of the fundraising activities for some of the high schools near us. I know the Del Norte High School and the Sandia baseball team we've donated to and helped in their fundraising efforts in the past. My daughters attend Annunciation Catholic school here in town, so a lot of the school activities we try to be involved with and help in that fundraising arm as well. And in the wintertime, we spend a lot of time in Taos, New Mexico. So we've helped out and contributed time and effort and resources to the Taos Winter Sports Team the past couple of years in the wintertime. So a lot of the activities are related to youth sports, to some of those things that we're passionate about, and trying to serve younger members of the community.
That's just because you can ski every weekend, isn't it?
That's part of it too. That's an added benefit.
That's good. Winter recreation is always good.
I totally agree. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. All right. Well, what about so starting with Judge Wernersbach, I'm sorry. Do you believe that judges have an obligation to improve the public understanding of the courts? And if so, how should they carry out that obligation?
I mean, I think obligation is a funny word. I'm not sure if we have an obligation to make sure that public understands the courts, but I think it would certainly be of help in the community and to the court, and really for the citizens who are not involved in the court system at all, just because there is so much misinformation out there that I honestly don't see another way except for the courts to take on that obligation. So as far as how they should carry it out, I mean, again, it's tricky because judges, have to stay pretty neutral. And so speaking to the press can be tricky, writing an op-ed or something could be tricky. So I think what I've tried to do is make sure my rulings are very clear, and try to be very clear on the record as much as possible and in follow-up orders as much as possible, just so if the media or whomever is trying to report on a certain case, that at least hopefully there's an explanation for why I might have ruled on something the way I did that is based in law and fact or whatever is brought before me. Because I think, again, there's just seemingly a lot of misrepresentation or misunderstanding about what the court's role really is or what their burden really is. And so I think the only thing I feel like I can directly do right now, though, is try to be as clear as possible in my rulings and my reasoning for them. But I don't know, Judge Montano, what do you think?
Well, I'm not sure the courts have an active role in justifying or explaining specific decisions we make, but rather we can do a better job of explaining how the courts as a whole work, which would help the general public's anxiety over why some decisions are made and what ultimately gets reported sometimes maybe negatively for the court. As judges, we're to uphold the law and apply it fairly to everyone, and it's critical that judges and the court don't just apply or just don't appeal to public opinion, but we're duty bound to uphold the law and ensure everyone's rights are protected. So let me know if that helps answer that question.
It's interesting here too. I don't mean to interrupt, but we're so sort of alone in our chambers doing hearings every day. I don't really see what other judges are doing or what they're thinking. So it's interesting to hear Judge Montano. I'm just as interested in his answers as mine, and just because I'm not sure what everybody's thinking right now on the bench as far as our obligations go. So this is interesting. Thanks.
And what's important is making sure, and the pandemic has made this difficult, but ensuring that the public has access to see what's actually going on in the courts. The courthouse is sort of open. It's not fully opened. So a lot of what we've been doing is what we're doing now. We're appearing remotely over Zoom. So, the Supreme Court during the pandemic's done a great job of televising some of its proceedings and with their new YouTube channel. So it's shown that with technology, we can do more to ultimately be more transparent and let the public know, what we're doing. And even if they don't agree with our decisions, they'll be appreciative of why we're making the decisions, and it's done in an open and transparent manner.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you both. I guess, it did occur to me that that both of your appointments came at the same time, I believe both of you were appointed in January, and then prior to that, we're both practicing attorneys. Mm-hmm. Is it hard, I guess, on that same topic of trying to improve the public understanding? Is it hard to stay in the judge role when you have, litigants or defendants in your courtroom who have a lot of questions or appear to be lost in the system?
Well, I think what's been a challenge, and I think, you're a defense attorney. I commend defense attorneys, public defenders, private defense attorneys. The most difficult and challenging thing is just to be patient with the jails being closed and not having access to your clients and your clients not having access to you. It's been a challenge. And I think, remote technology has been great for attorneys, for judges. It's been efficient, but what's lost in that efficiency is that interaction that is necessary for attorneys to have with their clients. And I'm sure Judge Wernersbach would say the same thing. As judges, we're constantly having to ask, do you need more time? It's a lot more timely. I'm sure clerks, court reporters, court staff, it's challenging to them, but at the end of the day, people having access to their attorneys is crucial. And that's been difficult during this time, during how we're operating remotely presently.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really hard too to, uphold the sort of forum on Zoom, or the formality of the forum on Zoom. And I keep saying that as a lawyer, I was kind of loving Zoom hearings. It's kind of nice to throw on a nice shirt and appear, or whatever. But as a judge, it really is difficult, to just establish everybody's role and not feel like kind of a telemarketer working the technology and, you're on mute, God, I'm going to mute now. There's just a lot of that, which definitely distracts from the substantive issues at hand. And so I think that has really been far more of a challenge than I thought it might be as a practitioner. As a judge, it is a little bit hard to manage, and I too agree. I'm happy to give plenty of time for attorneys to talk, because I know that sometimes they don't have access, and it's certainly not face-to-face access that you can have in a breakout room on your Zoom meeting, but it does. There's a time management issue. There's MDC breathing down your throat with the next inmate, et cetera. And so it is a little bit of a juggle. So I am looking forward to getting back in court on most of these hearings, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them.
Great. Well, maybe that would be a good time to kind of just stick with the pandemic question that I had saved for later, but I think we're on the topic. It sounds like the pandemic has been challenging for the both of you as judges, and also when you were practicing attorneys, but you both have touched on some growth that has come because of the challenges. The virtual hearings that we've all now had to adapt to. We all have the technology. We were all forced to learn the technology. So how do you feel about the changes that have been made in response to the pandemic? And are there any of those changes that you would that you think might stick even after the pandemic?
I think, as one thing that's been great about having court conducted in this manner is back when we were all in the courtroom, a lot of times you're waiting on an attorney, whether it be the prosecutor or defense counsel, to be bouncing back and forth between courtrooms. Some private attorneys are needing to go between different counties or different courthouses, whether it be in Metro Court as well. And I think that's been the nice thing about being able to conduct these hearings that aren't of as great of consequence if it's a status hearing, to provide updates to the court on things that can take 5 minutes. Now, granted, jury trials, more substantive motions, more complex hearings, it will be nice to return to the courtroom, but it'll be interesting to see if, using remote technologies, if both parties agree, both defense and the prosecution agree, maybe we can, cut down on some of the transport between the local jail and the courthouse, and we might be able to be more efficient, which we've shown we can be efficient in some of these cases by having remote hearings. But we'll see what sticks and what doesn't. As I imagine, the Supreme Court's going to be providing all courts guidance with, maybe some of the things that came out of this that were good, and maybe we can hold on to some of those practices.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like I said, as a practitioner, I thought the Zoom, especially for not as substantive hearings, was great. You could appear in federal court, district court, metro court, on one morning without breaking a sweat like you usually do. But I do, and I also think, in a strange way, I think Zoom has kind of humanized people more. I mean, it's so intimate in a certain way. You're staying in people's houses. You're not high on a bench while the defendant is below, or anything like that. And so I think there is sort of an equalizing on Zoom that's kind of interesting and perhaps positive. I don't know. And I think it's also positive that, like Judge Montano said, we've realized there are certain hearings that certainly can be done via email, much as we always suspected all these years, or a quick Zoom or phone call or something. But again, yeah, I also agree that the substantive hearings, especially jury trials, obviously, but even evidentiary hearings, or multiple witness hearings are just much more easily conducted in court when we're all in the same place and people are not distracted by whatever's going on at their house or at work, or, when we're having witnesses testify while they're driving, all kinds of crazy stuff. And so, that kind of formality, I just think it does help get the job done a little bit better sometimes and focus the issue a little bit more. And so I do think bringing that back in will be good, but there's certainly some lessons we can learn of how we're conducting things and transporting defendants all the time and et cetera from all of this that I hope the Supreme Court takes into account. We'll see.
I've done 2 jury trials during the last couple of months, and what Judge Wernersbach just said about some things being able to be done over email. Having to do jury trials during COVID, we're not able to have bench conferences where we have to exit the courtroom outside the presence of the jury because we need to stay socially distant. What I would say is attorneys have done a good job trying to hash out a lot of argument before trial, and they do it outside of our presence, whether it's picking up the phone or doing an email. And really seeing, what evidence is going to come in, what do we not object to, what are some of the things where we can work together so that we're not going to be wasting the jury's time. And I think attorneys on both sides, prosecutors and defense attorneys, have had to really come together and hash a lot of these things out outside the presence of the judge, which has been a good thing. So hopefully they'll take out of the pandemic some of that continued working relationship to be more efficient and to make sure we're operating more smoothly coming out of this.
That's a good point.
Yes, I actually share that the appreciation for how the pandemic, the court orders and the scheduling orders really do kind of front load a lot of the trial work onto the attorneys, force everybody to get together, meet and confer, try to make agreements ahead of time, make sure all of their evidence is ironed out before the trial. And I think you're right, Judge Montano, it does makes everything go more smoothly. I have really, really enjoyed just the level of preparation that everyone's forced to do for either for in-person hearing trials during the pandemic or even for virtual trials during the pandemic. It makes everything go a lot more smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's always the juror's biggest frustration during these COVID trials is, you keep having to get up to leave the courtroom to hash out these things outside of our presence. And, we can only do so much, but if that can be done ahead of time in motions in limine, if the parties are able to identify issues that are going to be of concern, handling those things prior to and be more prepared will make for more efficient, more smoothly run, whatever the hearing may be, trial or otherwise.
I like that you said meet and confer too. I mean, I know that's more like a civil deadline, but I feel like that is something that we could adopt in a certain form, in trial prep, as far as like hammering out what issues you think the court's going to need to deal with, or or whatever, having those kinds of conversations. Because I think as these cases are coming back around to some parties, they're now conferring, but they've been languishing for a while, and so these cases are kind of, people don't really know what's going on with them yet. And so I think maybe setting some things like that would be helpful. I don't know if we're going to adopt that, but I like that idea or that terminology.
The New Mexico Criminal Defense Lawyers Association is a leading voice for criminal justice reform. We fight for a fair and just criminal legal system in the courts, at the legislature, and in our communities every day. Make your voice heard by supporting our work today. Go to NMCDLA.org to find out how.
Well, thank you both for your insight on those issues. Let's turn back to a topic that we touched on earlier about the way that the criminal justice system is portrayed in the media. The Albuquerque Journal has recently described the criminal justice system as a three-legged stool. Yet often it seems that the media coverage of the courts excludes one or two of those legs. Do you support the courts having a more active role in educating the public for the reasons behind the court's decisions?
Yeah, and I think I kind of answered that earlier in talking about the courts not having an active role in justifying or explaining specific decisions, but rather educating and doing a better job of explaining how the court works as a whole, and would help the general public's anxiety over some of these decisions that we're making that end up in the news. And, I think, as I stated earlier, just being able to be more transparent and having the general public be able to see what we're doing has been difficult during COVID, but, with some of these hearings being made more available to the public. One thing that the Supreme Court has done in the past is taking cases to high schools and having those proceedings done in front of that type of audience. Maybe that's something that we'll be able to do at the district court level as the pandemic ends and we're able to be in places with more than, the limitations that are currently present. And that's a way of educating the public as to our role and giving them a better understanding of the job that we're having to do.
Yeah, I agree. I actually did one of those oral arguments with the Court of Appeals at a high school in Milwaukee or something. It's very interesting. Like 9th and 10th graders or something were listening to these oral arguments, and they were interested. It was cool, and it was interesting to a lot of kids who hadn't been exposed to anything like that before. But as far as the courts having an active role, I like that idea of doing like more public, like very public types of hearings. And I think like Judge Montano said, just kind of explaining what the court's role is. And I don't know exactly how that would come across except to allow the public to access hearings more readily. But, I think there's very much obviously a court of public opinion, in Albuquerque, and that's what we're up against a lot of the time. And so I think just trying to explain to the public in some way that we can't follow the court of public opinion. That's, literally in our job description, that we have to look at it independently. And so, I don't know, again, if that's through trying to get articles in the paper or give speeches or just be in the community explaining, or if it's public access to hearings. But I do think there there does need to be an explanation of how the court operates and what our task is. And I think that I do support the court having a more active role in that, only because we're the only people that can do it, I think, effectively. So just the most effective way, I'm not sure of quite yet, but I like those ideas.
Yes, definitely. I like that suggestion too. I think, Judge Montano kind of touched on it, that, now that we have virtual access to hearings, like maybe that is an opportunity for the public to, to be able to participate without actually having to even come down to the courthouse. But Judge Wernersbach, I like your suggestion as well about, just even more public engagement, on a community level, like, just giving talks or sharing information. I know that you can't, talk about an individual case, with, just because somebody asks, but certainly, making that effort to reach out and share information, I think would help.
Yeah.
Now, let's again kind of shift gears to the topic of pretrial interviews. I know this came up during the legislative session, and I know it's been kind of an issue that's been debated, at least in the legal system. Do the both of you practiced law for many, many years as trial attorneys, and I would like to know both of your perspectives on whether pretrial interviews provided an opportunity to obtain a just and efficient resolution for all parties. And if I can start with you, Judge Wernersbach.
Yes, I do think that they provided that opportunity. And I feel like it's an opportunity that maybe would come if you just set it for trial, perhaps, without a pretrial interview, but that it can provide that opportunity while saving resources before you had to get to that point. So, I was a defense attorney, so oftentimes in pretrial interviews, the witnesses would give their story and it might be different, or, right in that moment, you're with the district attorney typically that on your case. And so you could talk right then about what the information you guys just got meant for the case, and sort of have a meet and confer of sorts about issues on the cases, far in advance of having a jury waiting. And so I think for that reason, it's very effective. I do, I respect the argument that it's hard on certain victims, and I don't doubt that. And so I do think that potentially there's room for exceptions to the in-person requirement for certain, alleged victims or certain witnesses, and that should be worked out on a case-by-case basis. But I think generally it does provide, information earlier rather than later in the case, which is beneficial to everyone, really, and certainly the court's resources. So I support them.
And what about you, Judge Montano? How do you feel about this topic?
I think as a prosecutor for, over 10 years, and as a supervisor for probably 4 or 5 of those years, the pretrial interview process allows for, I think, earlier resolution of cases, because it's generally at that time that we would find out whether or not the case is going to get better or worse from the prosecutor's perspective. And as Judge Wernersbach said, when you have the defense attorney and the prosecutor there, you can kind of see where this might go in front of a jury, and it provides an opportunity maybe to resolve the case. So I think in the time when Judge Wernersbach and I were on opposing sides, that's how it worked. I think now with preliminary hearings being a prime mode of cases coming through the system, it's possible that maybe pretrial interviews need to be rethought or relooked at. If there's been that opportunity to have that witness already under cross-examination. But I always felt, and I think when Judge Wernersbach and I were line trial attorneys, that was how we would settle cases. That used to be what it was like in a grand jury system. So I always thought that I could see where weaknesses would be in the case and why it might be the time to offer an even better plea than what might have already been on the table, and that's when that used to happen at that pretrial interview.
Yeah, I agree, and it's a good point about the preliminary hearings too, because that's a sworn statement, so we've been more useful for later use, honestly, to both parties. But yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that either. That there, with a lot of cases going to prelim now in this district, that may inform, or it can inform, the pretrial interview process. I hadn't thought of it like that. It's interesting. Okay, well, let's turn to another topic. On what are your views on whether the court deals effectively with racial and gender bias? And this time I'd like to start with Judge Montano.
It's always something that the court and all of us need to be cognizant of and constantly be working on. Efforts by the court for trainings of court employees and staff is something that the court has done to, broaden people's horizons on these topics. Ultimately, Judge Wernersbach and I are responsible for what happens in each of our courts, and it's critical and personal to us. Having diversity on our bench is important, and not only for having a diverse field of judges, but making sure that the various roles of the court staff are also reflecting the community at large, that, we have bailiffs and court reporters and court staff who, look like the general public, and as a court, making sure that we're providing language access where there might be a barrier for those people seeking access and seeking, justice and access to the court. So I think, at least here in the second, that that's something that the court as a whole takes seriously, and making sure that we're making sure that we're serving the community that we're here to serve.
Yeah, I think our court, I don't know if it's unique or not, actually, as far as the numbers, but, we have, of the 11 criminal judges, I think 7 are women. And, I think that's maybe similar in civil, certainly in family, so we have great representation, at least on the bench, as far as gender goes. And I think in that way, as far as internally, that this court, from what I've observed, is dealing well with any gender or racial bias. I don't see that being an issue too much here, within the internal workings, but I do think we have an obligation to look at it in the community a little bit more than, we might see in front of our faces in our workplace, because I think where a lot of racial and gender bias might come in this role is more in policing and charging, sometimes decisions that aren't made in front of us. And so I think also, as far as dealing with it generally, like being open to that when you're reading complaints, when you're looking at warrants and things like that, just to ensure, as we would in every case, quite honestly, it's based on the law, but, just ensuring that that's what's happening out in the community as well, as best as we can. So it's a tricky thing to handle from this angle, but I think the court deals fairly effectively with it, especially this one, is from what I've seen. So I found it very encouraging working here in that way, honestly.
Thank you both. So I guess that leads into the next question, which is, what are your views on the need for more diversity on the bench and the manner in which the court treats members of different races? I guess, I'm sorry, go ahead, Judge Montano, sorry.
Yeah, and I think Judge Wernersbach and I kind of jumped into that in the last answer, that, having diversity on the bench is important, both gender and racial diversity. We should strive to have judiciary that looks like the community at large. And we're not just 11 judges here on the criminal bench. We have a lot of support staff in our bailiffs and the different functions of the court reporters, monitors, and showing that to the public that we are a diverse group, not just from the judges, but the court staff as a whole. And having people be able to come into our courthouse and see people that look like them, and making sure we're providing, like I said earlier, the language access to a lot of people who come from diverse backgrounds who might not necessarily have English as their first language is something that I think the court does a good job of making sure that access is there for the various communities that are in Albuquerque.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't have much to add. I was just thinking of a case I had the other day where the defendant spoke Venetian. I mean, it literally was like I learned of a new country and a new language that exists in the world that I didn't even know before. And we were able to get an interpreter for it, which I found to be fascinating. And it's a mix of Spanish and like Vietnamese and slang or something. It's a very crazy language. Anyway, but I agree. I mean, I think, people coming into this courthouse in order to feel comfortable and like it's representative of them and in their best interest, it needs to reflect their own communities. And so, I mean, I think the court needs to work hard to ensure that we do that. I think we do a pretty good job of it here so far from what I've seen, but I definitely think it needs to stay at the forefront of hiring decisions and appointment decisions all the time, of course.
Great. Thank you both for your perspectives on that. Let's turn to specialty courts and alternative sentences. So one of the more progressive trends across the country is expanding behavioral and mental health treatment as an alternative to incarceration. So how do you feel about expanding the court's use of treatment programs through specialty courts? And let's start with Judge Wernersbach.
I'm all for it, quite honestly. I really think, as research is done through the years of the criminal justice system, I think it's very clear that most defendants appearing in a criminal courthouse have histories of trauma, abuse, all kinds of difficult lives and situations. And so I think there's nothing that, except for the cost, of course, but there's no downside of trying to address people where they're at and trying to address some of those root causes. And I think the specialty courts try to do a really good job of that. I am a drug court judge, and so I have just started getting more involved in that program in the last several weeks. And I've been really impressed with how much the probation officers, the counselors, the attorneys involved really have an investment in the people that are in these courts and want them to succeed and want to meet them where they're at and provide, what they need to get better, because it's not just for these people, but it is for their whole community. And then that trickles out to the larger community. And so I think even if people struggle or fail out in the end or, violate, I think trying and expanding access to those programs is really crucial if we want to try to address the needs of the criminal justice system, and try to address crime in this community. I think it's really important. So I'm very much for expanding specialty courts.
What about you, Judge Montano? How do you feel about expanding specialty courts within or as an alternative?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it, as Judge Wernersbach said as well. When I was at the DA's office, I was the supervisor of the Special Proceedings Division. And at that time, that oversaw Veterans Court, it oversaw mental health court, drug court. And then when I was still at the DA's office, I was part of one of the first DAs to be involved in young adult court, which Judge Leo supervises. And now coming onto the bench, I have the opportunity of being a backup judge to her. So as Judge Wernersbach's getting more intimately involved in her specialty court, I'm re-engaging from a different level in young adult court. And the criminal justice system isn't just meant to lock up the worst of the worst. Most people that come through the system, they're going to be in it just for a small period of time. And it's good to see success stories whenever we have the opportunity to see that in the specialty courts. Another thing that the court has done from even my time when I was at the DA's office is pretrial services has been doing a great job of identifying people in what potential specialty court they may be best for. If someone's a veteran, maybe they can notify a defense attorney who may not know that this person was a veteran, that this might be a candidate for that specialty court, or recognizing someone has mental health issues, defense attorneys not having access in person to their clients like we've had in the past because of the pandemic. Well, once you have a pretrial service officer monitoring this person, they're in a position to be able to route them to maybe a mental health court. So over the last few years, I think pretrial services has done a good job of being able to identify where a particular individual might be best for specialty court. So I think being able to expand those services to make sure we're diverting more cases, not just to probation and parole and to incarceration, is an important thing. And I think here in the second, there's been a real strong effort to do that. And I think obviously more resources will always be something that can make us do that even in a better way that we're doing it now.
Great, thank you both. On that same topic, what are the obstacles from the court's perspective to providing alternative sentences or to diverting people into specialty courts? Let's start with Judge Montano.
Well, at the end of the day, I think the obstacle is always going to be having buy-in from both sides, whether it's, potentially the prosecution not be willing to offer a specialty court for a given individual, or even getting buy-in from, the defense side. So I think the best we can do is to, continue to have these options available to the parties. And, as we continue to have greater successes with some of the newer specialty courts that we have, and if we're able to bring newer specialty courts on over time, hopefully we can get buy-in from all sides, because at the end of the day, we can't force specialty courts on the people. We got to have buy-in from, the parties and the litigants, and ultimately the defendant. So hopefully over time we can develop a more robust specialty court menu for people and have success as time goes on.
Yeah, I would agree. Essentially, the buy-in from both sides is probably the biggest struggle, and in the sense that, and probably the trickiest clients or defendants are the ones that have multiple transfer and receivings or multiple commercial burglaries or something like that. That's clearly typically a habit fueled by drug use, but it has resulted in many charges and a lot of time hanging on over their head. And when they get to that point, I think there's still quite a need for intervention and specialty court, but it is much harder, understandably so, for the prosecution to offer something like that when somebody has a history. Alternatively, I think from the defense side, a lot of defendants, I think, see specialty courts as an opportunity to just violate, or an opportunity for them to get taken to jail because they're a drug addict or relapsing. And I can understand that point of view too. I will say, now being more involved in drug court, I see that that's not really the intent of drug court by any means, but I know as a defense attorney, I too worried about certain clients submitting to drug court because I knew maybe they weren't ready, or whatever. And so I think there is a understandable hesitation and worry about joining specialty courts for that reason sometimes. So I think educating maybe the community a little bit more, defense attorneys or defendants even a little bit more about what the purpose of the court really is, what the goal of the people in the court really is, could help with that. And also helping educate perhaps prosecutors that even though a person might be fairly down the line, there's still an opportunity here for some rehabilitation and some change, even if the person looks like a lost cause or something. So I think essentially what Judge Montano said, exactly.
Judge Wernersbach, I do agree with you. I think the education component of it is just really, really important, just from a defense practitioner's perspective. You know, it sometimes seems like that the rules and the requirements of all of the different specialty courts are changing. And so it's always hard to tell a client precisely, you know, what exactly they will be required to do if they participate in a particular court, because that's usually, in my experience, the first concern that people have is, well, what am I going to have to do? How many times am I going to have to report? And with there are a lot of options available through specialty courts, but it seems like the information or the requirements are always changing. So I agree with you. I think education is probably a key component.
No, honestly, I mean, I didn't know so much, for instance, about drug court before I joined. I referred a few clients, but I was always like, well, I think you have to do, you know, this and this. I'm not quite sure. And now I'm really clear in it. And it actually is a very clear program. It just, I never knew that. And nobody ever educated me. I never asked the right questions, apparently. So I think just knowing that there is actually a clear program and that information is out there, even that as education alone is a big step. So I'm talking to drug court about this right now.
No, I think that's a completely valid point. I personally still hesitate to refer anyone to drug court because I'm afraid of it. I don't know.
I know. I get it. I totally understand. I felt the same way.
But yeah, maybe that would be a good like CLE presentation or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right. So, do you believe that all citizens have adequate access to legal help and the legal system? And if not, what can be done to provide wider and better access? Do you want to?
No, I mean, I don't think all citizens have adequate access to legal help in that legal system. I mean, I think especially, you know, immigrant communities or, you know, undocumented immigrant communities, especially have a lot of trepidation and fear about accessing legal help or the legal system, and don't even know exactly what's out there for help. And not just those types of communities, but even, you know, impoverished communities or, you know, I think there's just a lot of fear of the legal system by a lot of people. And so I think those people are left out for sure. So, I mean, what can be done to provide wider and better access? I think education, you know, PR, I don't know, perhaps talking to communities. I honestly don't exactly know the right answer to that. But I don't know exactly how the court can reach out to those communities a little bit better, if that's just through attorneys or not. But I do think it's necessary because I think there is a large amount of crime that probably goes unreported, you know, especially domestic crimes and things like that. And so, yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think we could improve our access to those communities for sure.
I'll piggyback onto what Judge Wernersbach said. You know, courts have come a long way, but there's always an ability to do more. There have been access to justice efforts done by the court. There's been the Justice for All initiative that's happened here in the state. But, you know, obviously there are those communities, as Judge Wernersbach stated, that can have underreported crime for various reasons. Some of it being immigration, some of it being just other socioeconomic issues related to whatever the crime might be, and making sure that not just the court, but law enforcement and the other justice partners are out there educating the public at large as to people's roles and you know, having all of us have a better ability to educate the public that they can trust in the court system, that they can trust in the justice system, and that they can access the justice system.
I agree with both of you. Thank you so much for that feedback. I think education is so important, but I do think that it is challenging to try to reach everyone at their level.
Mm-hmm.
But all right. So do you believe that the compositions of juries adequately and fairly reflects society at large? Why or why not? And what can we do to change this? And we'll start with you, Judge Montano.
Well, having done 2 jury trials during COVID, I would say that the jury panels that I just had did adequately reflect society at large. We had representation of all ages. I can recall doing a trial just a couple weeks ago, and one of the jurors was recently turned 18 and just graduated from high school, and we had jurors going up to their 70s. So it's been a challenge. The good thing with the pandemic heading in the right direction, when I did a trial 6 weeks ago, a lot of the questions and a lot of the accommodations we were needing to make were based on people's ability to make sure that they weren't going to miss their vaccine appointment. And when we did a trial 6 weeks later, the issue was more, I have this vacation plan that's going to start, on Sunday. Am I going to still have to be in this trial next week because they are vaccinated? But I would say that as a whole, and I think it's probably because as a community, we're needing to address the backlog in all the cases that have sort of piled up during the pandemic, that we're going to be reaching out to every member of the community we can to make sure we're able to provide, people the jury trial that they're entitled to, and making sure that, we're providing jurors that represent the community at large.
Yeah, I haven't had a trial yet as a judge. They keep going away when I'm scheduled somehow. So I'm not sure from this angle, but I know as a practitioner, I often worried about the representation of the jury. Not that we wouldn't have a nice pool, but there are often people, who work or single parents or are business owners or just have things in their life where reporting to jury duty at all, much less serving on a jury, is really difficult. And so I do think those types of people who are reflective of our society and often are more of a peer group for defendants are not represented on juries necessarily. But the only thing I can really think of to help that is to pay jurors more, which I don't know if the legislature or the court budget officer would want me to say that, but I think that that's really the only way to help encourage people to come in and give up their job for a few days or hire a babysitter or whatever they might need to do to serve on a jury without the worry of the rest of their life going on. So that's my only concern about jury pools. But otherwise, I also think we do a pretty good job of trying to reach as many people as possible in this county for jury selection.
Great. So let's shift gears again. What do you believe to be the root causes for the high number of juvenile offenders, and what can the court system do to address this issue? And let's start with you, Judge Wernersbach.
I mean, honestly, I think the root causes for the high numbers of juvenile offenders are, like I was saying earlier, is the amount of sort of abuse and trauma and addiction that's going on in our community right now, and really our country at large, but especially here. I mean, I think kids are being exposed very early to very hard things, and a lot of horrible situations. And frankly, all they're seeing as a way of coping is drug use, violence, fronting guns to each other, things like this is kind of the community they're coming out of. That is the norm. And so I think addressing, again, those root causes, perhaps in specialty courts, perhaps in, earlier diversions, is, in an effort to basically stop this cycle is really one of the best ways the court can help reduce those numbers, is just, again, trying to address not just the crime, but why the crimes are occurring. And so hopefully that can start to take effect, because it is really upsetting how young we're seeing in this court. I mean, I'm having people who literally just turned 18, with very serious crimes, and it's surprising to me. So I do think it's an issue that not just the juvenile court needs to address, but also this adult court, to prevent those juveniles from even getting up here in the first place. So, Yeah,
unfortunately, by the time people or individuals get into our courthouse, a lot of damage has already been done. And there are many things the court can try and do to get people on the right track. And hopefully we address that for some of these individuals in the juvenile system. But, the legislator and the court should be working on efforts together to address early childhood care, education, giving parents the resources to succeed, to hopefully, curtail what we're seeing. And hopefully that would be the way of addressing some of the root causes that don't end up coming downstream to us, here in the adult justice system.
Yeah, thank you both for that. When I was I had a higher caseload in children's court, I would usually ask for the judge to order no social media as a condition of release, because it seems like that's a common theme also in a lot of the juvenile cases, and even in some of the young adult cases too. It seems like that's just such a powerful force and influence on kids nowadays.
You're totally right. I mean, I think it's a really negative force, as you said, of comparing and seeing things that people, I mean, a lot of people are sort of bragging about crimes or, sort of activities on social media to each other. So I think that's true. It's just a difficult thing to impose, or to police, I guess, obviously.
That is true. That's the problem is the compliance side. You can order it, but you can't force compliance. Okay. Well, what do you think about the growing prison populations, and what are your views about the court's involvement in responding to prison overcrowding?
Well, I can take this one. I can remember I prosecuted probation violations for probably about 4 years. And at that time, this is pre bail reform and some of the Arnold Foundation implementation that we've done in this courthouse. I recall and remember MDC being so overcrowded that we were shipping inmates to Polk County, Texas. And it was the wildest thing. We had such a high population in MDC. And I think with, under Justice Daniels, the Supreme Court took on bail reform and they took on pretrial release. And I think now we're seeing probably some of the lowest levels of incarceration at MDC from, historic standards of, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So I think the court has played an active role in pretrial release, in spearheading bail reform. And I think that has helped at least pretrial with some of overcrowding issues that Bernalillo County saw, in not too long ago when we were sending people to Polk County, Texas. So I think the court played a pivotal role in helping to address the issue, at least in Bernalillo County.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as far as the prison population going, I think partly what's happening too is that prison is kind of the last resource, right, for a lot of people who are struggling with mental illness or drug addiction and are living on the streets and picking up crimes, et cetera. And so again, I mean, much like many of these questions, I think some sort of intervention or behavioral centers or some alternative hopefully could be offered. I mean, it's always sort of tragic to me when people who have like a mentally ill family member who gets violent or dangerous, only have the police to call if that happens. There's really no other choice of what to do to keep themselves safe. And then inevitably that person ends up in jail. And, and it's just a cycle that keeps continuing. And so if there was an alternative place to take people perhaps, or an alternative number to call, that would be really helpful. But that would take, of course, resources and funneling of resources in a different way. So I think that kind of thing could help not only the local jail population, but hopefully the people who are ultimately ending up in Department of Corrections as well.
I agree with you. I think, obviously our community does need to do a lot more to address the mental health crisis, but I also understand that the court can't fix that, the underlying causes and the resource issue. But it was the last question that I had on my list. And so I just wanted to take a second to thank both of you so much for your time this afternoon. It was so nice to, get to talk to the both of you in a setting that isn't court and that allows the community to just get to know you all a little bit beder.
Thank you for having us. It's fun.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Yurcic. I'll see you, I'm sure, in virtual courtroom in the next few days.
Oh, me too. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Member Services Department, Second Judicial Court, and the New Mexico Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Kevin McLeod at Incomtech. The views of the presenters are that of their own and not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.